The twin moons of Veon 4 hung low in the purple night sky, casting a silver glow over the forest below. The trees were tall and covered in glowing moss, their leaves whispering like quiet voices in the wind. Somewhere in that peaceful wilderness, a human explorer named Mason Hale parked his small cruiser beside a creek. He had been traveling alone for weeks, mapping uncharted zones for the Terran Survey Corps. To him, the forest was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that felt like it was waiting for something to happen. He stepped out of the cruiser, stretching his sore shoulders. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain and metal. His boots sank into the damp earth as he carried a small container to fill with water. The forest around him glowed with faint blue light from the moss-covered stones. Tiny insects buzzed like electric sparks. It was strange but beautiful, a place untouched by war, greed, or noise. Mason crouched near the creek, watching his reflection ripple. He was about to stand when a sound cut through the air, a scream. Not an echo, not a mistake. A real scream, high, desperate, and full of pain. Mason froze. His hand went automatically to his plasma pistol. The scream came again, this time followed by deep growls and the thunder of hooves, or something like hooves, smashing through the underbrush. He looked up at the sky. His radio was dead. The signal couldn't reach through the dense canopy. For a moment he thought of ignoring it. This planet wasn't his problem. He wasn't here to play hero. But then he heard the scream again, weaker now. It wasn't the sound of a soldier. It was the sound of someone who had lost all strength to fight. He cursed under his breath and ran. Branches tore at his jacket as he pushed through the thick vegetation. The glowing moss lit his way like faint lanterns, and the distant noise grew louder. The growls were monstrous now, deep, wet, and animalistic. Mason's heart pounded as he broke through the final line of trees. And stopped. In the clearing below him, lit by moonlight, was chaos. 6 massive boars the size of trucks circled something, someone. Their tusks gleamed like metal blades. Their hides were dark gray and steaming with heat. The ground trembled with each stomp of their clawed feet. In the middle of them lay a woman, or something close to one. Her skin shimmered like molten silver, glowing faintly where it was cut and bleeding. She clutched a long wooden spear that was cracked in 2. Her white hair was tangled and dirty, her breathing shallow. One of the beasts roared and lunged at her. She rolled to the side, stabbing upward with the broken spear, but it snapped in half. Useless. The creature raised its tusks to strike again. That's when Mason moved. He jumped from the ridge, landing hard on the muddy ground, plasma pistol already raised. The first shot hit the beast square between the eyes, blowing out a burst of blue flame. It screamed, stumbled, and fell. The others turned on him immediately, their red eyes glowing like burning coals. "Come on then," Mason shouted, firing again. The next boar charged straight at him, tusks swinging like axes. Mason dove aside, rolled, and fired another shot into its neck. It howled, but the blast only made it angrier. It rammed into a tree, shaking the ground. Mason's ears rang. The alien woman cried out, her voice weak, full of pain and warning. One of the beasts went for her again. Mason grabbed a nearby rock and threw it, shouting to draw it back toward him. The creature turned, snorting and stamping the ground, then lunged again. Mason switched to his plasma blade and slashed at its face as it came down. The smell of burned flesh filled the air. The fight felt endless as a blur of sweat, blood, and light. Every time one creature fell, another replaced it. But finally, after what felt like an hour, the last beast crashed to the ground, twitching, smoke rising from its hide. Mason stood there panting, covered in dirt and glowing alien blood. His arm ached from recoil. He turned toward the woman. She was lying against a fallen log, breathing hard, eyes wide. He walked closer, slowly, not wanting to scare her. She looked human in shape, but her face was delicate and alien. Her eyes large and silver, her skin smooth like glass. She tried to speak, but only a strange sound came out. Something between a word and a hum. Mason knelt beside her, checking her wound. Her blood wasn't red. It glowed faintly blue like starlight trapped in liquid. "Easy," he whispered. "You're safe now." She looked at him, confusion and fear mixing in her gaze. Then, as if realizing something, she grabbed his arm with surprising strength and whispered one clear word. "Run." Mason frowned. "Run? Why?" The answer came a second later. A roar in the distance, deeper than the boars, like something ancient and angry had just woken up. Mason's stomach turned cold. He lifted her in his arms, rushing back toward the cruiser. Behind him, the forest began to shake again. The night that had seemed peaceful now pulsed with danger. And somewhere in the darkness, something even worse than the boars was coming for them. He didn't look back. He just ran, carrying the alien woman, his heart pounding, the sound of roaring beasts chasing him toward the stars. The cruiser's engines screamed as Mason pushed the throttle to its limit. The ship lifted off the muddy ground, slicing through the fog and breaking past the treetops. Behind them, the forest shook with monstrous growls that echoed up into the sky. Mason didn't stop until the radar showed nothing but silence below. Only then did he let go of the controls and turn to look at his passenger. The alien woman sat slumped in the co-pilot's seat, her breathing shallow. Her silver hair clung to her face and her skin still shimmered faintly under the emergency lights. Mason grabbed the med kit from the wall and knelt beside her. Her wound was deep, a jagged tear across her side, still glowing blue. He pressed the auto-seal patch against it, watching as it hissed and sealed shut. When he looked closer, he noticed that her veins pulsed with light, not the reflection of the cruiser's panels, but real glowing energy under her skin. It was beautiful and frightening at the same time. He had seen hundreds of alien races in his years of exploring, miners, traders, soldiers, but nothing like her. "Stay still," Mason said softly. "You're safe here." Her eyes fluttered open. They were wide, silver like liquid metal, reflecting his face back at him. She didn't seem to understand his words. Her mouth opened slightly, whispering something in her own language. Soft, musical, almost like singing. He pointed to himself and said, "Mason." She blinked, confused, then touched her chest weakly. "Elira." Her voice was barely a whisper, but her name carried something ancient in it, something that didn't belong to this world. Mason nodded, trying to smile. "Nice to meet you, Elira. You've had a rough night." Elira looked around the cabin, her eyes widening as she saw the stars through the cockpit window. The cruiser soared above the clouds, the twin moons glowing far below. She seemed frightened of the sky itself, as if she'd never been this high before. She grabbed the armrest tightly, trembling. Mason adjusted the gravity stabilizer. "Easy, you're fine. Just a little turbulence." Her gaze moved back to him and she said something again in her soft alien tongue. Her hand reached for his jacket, pointing at the emblem stitched on the chest, a small silver planet with the letters TSC under it. He understood her question. "Terran Survey Corps," he said. "I'm human. From Earth." She stared at him in silence, then whispered one strange word. "Forbidden." Mason frowned. "What?" She leaned back, eyes darting nervously to the window. Her voice trembled as she repeated it. "Forbidden? Human." A chill ran down his spine. "Forbidden by who?" Before she could answer, the cruiser jolted. A faint alarm flashed on the dashboard. Tracking signal detected. Mason cursed and slammed a switch to scramble the beacon. Whoever was out there had found them. He turned to Elira. "Who's following you?" She closed her eyes, breathing faster, her glowing veins flickering like a dying flame. "Hunters," she whispered. "My kind, they come for me. Why?" Mason demanded, checking the radar again. "Why are they after you?" Elira opened her eyes slowly, and for the first time he saw tears, small glowing drops that fell down her cheeks like liquid light. She whispered, "I broke their law. I saved the wrong people." The words hung heavy in the air. Mason didn't understand, but he could feel the weight behind them, the kind of guilt that never left. Outside the ship, thunder rumbled across the clouds, flashing silver light through the windows. Elira looked out at the storm and said softly, "You should not have saved me. Now they will come for you too." Mason stared at her. She didn't look dangerous, just scared, fragile, and tired. But the way she said it made his stomach twist. He thought of leaving her somewhere safe, maybe on a trade outpost. But deep inside, he knew he wouldn't do that. He had made his choice the moment he pulled her from that forest. The radar beeped again, louder this time. Several red dots appeared on the screen, closing in fast. "Great," Mason muttered. "Looks like your friends brought company." Elira's eyes glowed faintly as she turned toward the window. "Not friends," she said quietly. "Executioners." Mason took a deep breath, his hands gripping the controls. The cruiser's engines roared to life again, slicing through lightning and rain. He could see faint shapes in the clouds behind them. Silver ships, sleek and fast, scanning the skies like predators. He looked at Elira, who sat trembling but calm in her eyes, and said, "You're not dying tonight." "Not while I'm flying," she stared at him. A mix of fear and disbelief, and then whispered something that sounded almost like hope. Outside, plasma fire lit the sky. The hunt had begun, and Mason Hale, the lone human explorer, was now flying straight into a war he didn't understand, all because he couldn't ignore a scream in the forest. The cruiser soared above the storm for hours, dodging lightning and enemy scans. Mason's hands ached from gripping the controls, but he didn't dare relax. Every time he thought they'd lost the pursuers, another radar ping appeared, faint, then growing brighter. Whoever those hunters were, they didn't give up easily. When the skies finally cleared, Mason guided the ship toward the outer orbit, where the pale curve of Vion 4 faded into darkness. Only then did he switch the cruiser to silent mode and lean back exhausted. His reflection stared back from the cracked monitor, eyes bloodshot, face streaked with dirt and alien blood. He wasn't supposed to get involved in local conflicts. He was an explorer, not a soldier. But he couldn't shake the image of Elira on the forest floor surrounded by beasts and blood. He turned toward the co-pilot's seat. Elira was sleeping, wrapped in a blanket, her silver hair spilling across her shoulder. Even in rest, she looked otherworldly, too beautiful and too fragile for this cruel galaxy. Her breathing was uneven, her body twitching like she was trapped in a nightmare. Mason adjusted the ship's temperature and sighed. Suddenly, she gasped awake, her eyes glowing faintly. Her hand reached for her side, clutching the wound. Mason knelt beside her quickly. "Easy, you're safe now. We're far from the forest." Her gaze darted around the cabin, frightened. Then, noticing his face, she calmed a little. She tried to speak, but the words trembled on her tongue. Mason handed her water. She stared at the clear liquid like it was something precious before drinking slowly. Her voice came out hoarse. "You don't know what you've done." Mason frowned. "You said your own kind were chasing you. Why? What did you do to deserve that?" Elira hesitated. Her eyes fell on the mirror beside her seat. Slowly, she turned her shoulder to him and pulled back the fabric covering her upper back. Mason froze. Burned into her skin, still faintly glowing, was a strange mark, a circle surrounded by twisting lines pulsing like fire under her flesh. "What is that?" he asked. Her fingers brushed the mark, her voice shaking. "It is the sign of exile. Once it is placed, it burns forever. It means I am no longer part of my world." Mason looked at her, unsure how to respond. "Exiled for what?" She took a deep breath, her eyes distant. "My people. We were created to guard the wild, the beasts, the forests, the balance. Long ago, humans came to trade and mine, and our elders ordered us to drive them out. But I saw what the humans built. Small farms, homes, children. They weren't warriors. They just wanted to live." She looked down, her hands trembling. "I disobeyed. I protected them. When the hunters came to destroy their village, I stood in their way. They called it betrayal. They burned this mark into me and left me for the beasts to finish." Mason sat back, silent. He could hear the hum of the engines, the faint crackle of static in the air. He had seen cruelty in many forms, warlords, slavers, pirates, but hearing it from her, it felt heavier. "You tried to save people," he said finally. "That doesn't make you a criminal." Elira looked at him sadly. "To my kind, mercy is weakness. They believe humans ruin worlds. To them, I ruined our honor." The cabin lights flickered for a second and a short electrical pulse. Mason glanced at the radar. 3 red dots blinked into existence again. They had been found. Elira's expression darkened. "They've locked onto me again. They never stop. Not until I'm gone." Mason's jaw tightened. He turned the cruiser toward a nearby asteroid belt. "Then we make sure they never find you again." She stared at him, puzzled. "Why risk your life?" "You owe me nothing," he smiled faintly. "Maybe I don't, but I don't leave people behind, not in a forest and not in space." The cruiser dove into the asteroid field, weaving between spinning rocks. Plasma fire streaked across the darkness as the hunter ships closed in. Mason's fingers danced across the controls, his eyes sharp. Elira watched him, surprise flickering in her gaze. "Human," she said softly. "You fight like a storm." "Thanks," he replied, grinning slightly. "Storms usually win." The ship jolted as a blast hit the rear thruster. Sparks flew from the ceiling. Mason cursed and turned the power to manual flight. Hold on tight, he shouted. Elira reached out her hand, pressing it against the metal wall. Her veins glowed bright, too bright, and a wave of light pulsed through the ship. The damaged systems flickered back online as if her energy had repaired them. Mason stared at her in disbelief. What did you just— Later, she interrupted, voice strained. They're coming again. The radar flashed red. Mason's hands tightened on the controls. Then we fight. She nodded once, her glowing eyes fierce now instead of afraid. The human and the exile sat side by side in that flickering cockpit, surrounded by darkness and incoming fire, their fates tied by one act of compassion in a cruel galaxy. As the hunter ships emerged from the void, Mason whispered to himself, "They picked the wrong human to chase." And with that, he plunged the cruiser straight into the battle. The silence before battle was always the loudest thing in space. Mason could hear his own heartbeat echoing in the cockpit, faster than the blinking light on the radar. 3 crimson dots were closing in fast. Hunter crafts, shaped like silver blades cutting through the void. Elira sat behind him, her hands pressed together as faint threads of light weaved between her fingers. Mason didn't know what she was doing, but the air around her shimmered like heat. Her skin glowed softly, the same light that had reignited his engines earlier. "They won't stop," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "To them I am a wound that must be erased." Mason didn't look back. "Then they'll have to bleed to do it." He flicked the power boosters and the cruiser lunged forward. Asteroids flashed by, huge spinning rocks tumbling in the darkness. Mason weaved between them, his eyes darting between radar and viewscreen. He had flown through minefields, storms, and ambushes before, but this was different. The hunters weren't shooting to kill. They were trying to trap him. A plasma net burst across the darkness in a glowing web stretching between 2 asteroids. Mason yanked the yoke to the right, the cruiser rolling just in time. The edges of the net grazed their hull, sparks exploding in a bright shower. "They're trying to disable us," Mason muttered. "They want you alive." Elira's voice grew colder. "No, they want me broken first." Another hunter ship dropped from above, firing a harpoon-like bolt that stuck to the cruiser's side, crackling with electricity. The lights flickered. Mason slammed his fist onto the emergency override. "Hang on," he shouted. He spun the ship sharply downward, scraping the hunter against an asteroid. The harpoon tore free with a violent flash, sending shards of metal and rock scattering through the void. The cruiser dove deeper into the field. Elira gasped as her mark, the sign of exile, flared with pain, glowing through her thin clothing. She pressed her hand to it, trembling. Mason noticed her reflection in the mirror. "That mark hurts when they're close, doesn't it?" She nodded weakly. "It's a tracker and a curse. My people built it to make sure the exiled never hid for long." Mason's jaw clenched. "So they branded you, then built a leash into your skin." He turned the ship sharply, the engines screaming as they burst free of the asteroid belt. Open space stretched before them, black, endless, and full of stars. But the hunters were faster. They shot out behind him, sleek and silent, their lights glowing red. "They've got range advantage," Mason muttered. "We can't outrun them." Elira lifted her head, eyes shining. "Then fight them where they least expect." Before he could ask what she meant, she pressed her glowing hand against the ship's floor. The lights dimmed. Then every surface in the cabin flickered with faint runes glowing like roots under the metal. Mason felt the hum of energy crawl through the hull like the ship itself was waking up. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I'm binding the cruiser to my energy," she said softly. "For a moment we will move as one." The radar flashed again, the hunters had locked on. Mason gripped the controls. "You'd better hope your magic plays nice with human tech." She gave him a small, daring smile. "It's not magic. It's survival." The first volley hit, a shower of plasma bolts, but the cruiser no longer moved like before. It flowed through space, twisting between the blasts like water. Mason felt the motion before it happened, as if the ship was reading his thoughts. Every turn felt instinctive, alive. He grinned. "Now this I can work with." He looped the cruiser in a wide arc, dodging another burst and flipping behind one of the hunters. With a squeeze of the trigger, he fired 2 plasma missiles. The explosion turned the void white. One hunter ship vanished into vapor. The second came in from the side. Elira raised her hand, her eyes blazing silver. A wave of energy pulsed outward from the cruiser, distorting the space around them. The hunter's shot missed, bending away like it had been swallowed by the air. Mason blinked. That was impossible. Not impossible, Elira whispered, her voice weakening. Costly. He looked at her skin was pale now, the glow fading. Sweat ran down her temple. You're draining yourself. She tried to smile. Better me than both of us. The final hunter ship rammed from below, its metal nose tearing into their lower hull. The cruiser shook violently, alarm screaming. Mason grabbed the manual thrusters. Hold on. The ship spun downward, caught in the gravity pull of a nearby moon. Mason pulled every lever he could reach, but the stabilizers were gone. The cruiser fell, burning through the thin atmosphere. They crashed into a canyon of red rock, sliding across the sand until they slammed into a ridge. Metal groaned. Smoke filled the cabin. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly, Mason coughed and unstrapped himself. Still alive? Elira nodded weakly. I've had softer landings. He helped her stand, both of them looking out the cracked window at the desert beyond. Twin suns rose over the horizon, painting the sand gold. Their ship was broken and the hunters would come again. But for now, for this fragile moment, they were still breathing. Mason exhaled, half a laugh, half exhaustion. You fight like a goddess, he said quietly. Elira's lips curved faintly. And you fall like a fool, he smiled back. Maybe, but I'm not done falling yet. Outside, in the quiet desert wind, the hunt was far from over. The sun rose harsh and white over the canyon, baking the sand into shimmering gold. Smoke curled lazily from the wreck of Mason's cruiser, its hull half buried in red dust. The air shimmered with heat, and the only sounds were the soft clicking of cooling metal and the whisper of desert wind. Mason stood on the ridge, scanning the endless horizon through cracked goggles. Nothing but dunes, rock spires, and distant mirages. No ships, no signals. For now, the hunters were gone, but not for long. Behind him, Elira knelt in the sand beside the shattered wing panel. Her pale hands brushed across the metal, and faint symbols of light spread from her fingers, tracing glowing patterns along the ship's skin. Mason had never seen anything like it. That doesn't look like standard repair protocol, he said, wiping sweat from his neck.
It isn't, she murmured without looking up.
I am speaking to the metal, asking it to hold a little longer. He raised an eyebrow. You talk to machines? She gave a small, tired smile. Machines are easy. They listen better than people. For a moment, the silence between them felt strangely peaceful, the kind of quiet that hides between wars. Mason crouched beside her, checking the damage. We lost one engine, half our fuel, and the nav core's toast. I might be able to patch the comms. Elira nodded faintly. We can't send a signal. They'll track it instantly. We need to hide. Hide where? Mason asked, looking out at the empty desert. She lifted her gaze toward the east. There, she whispered. Those cliffs. There's a place under them. An old place forgotten even by my people. Mason followed her stare. The cliffs shimmered in the distance, dark shapes beneath the rising heat. You're sure? Elira stood, her silver skin glinting in the sunlight. I was raised among the keepers. I know where the earth still remembers us. They set out together, walking through the desert. The heat was merciless. Mason carried a canteen and kept glancing back at the wreck, now shrinking behind them. The twin suns burned overhead like judgmental eyes. Elira moved quietly beside him, leaving faint blue footprints in the sand that faded after each step. When they reached the cliffs, Mason noticed something strange. The stone was carved with faint spirals half buried in dust, pulsing weakly with the same light as Elira's veins. She pressed her hand against the wall and the rock shifted with a low hum. The ground split open. A tunnel appeared, glowing faintly with bioluminescent moss. The air inside was cool and damp, a relief after the burning desert. Welcome to what remains of my world, she said softly. Inside, the tunnel widened into a chamber filled with ancient carvings. Symbols covered every wall, glowing in the same rhythm as Elira's heartbeat. Mason ran his hand along one of the engravings and it felt alive. What is this place? He asked. Elira knelt before a central stone pillar and placed her hands on it. This was a seed vault. My ancestors used it to store the code that shaped our beasts, their power, their instincts, their connection to us. We were once the guardians of balance, but greed twisted it. The elders tried to turn nature into a weapon. The beast became uncontrollable, and our people began to fear what they had made. Her eyes shimmered with tears. I was part of the generation born from that experiment. My blood carries the code they wanted. It can destroy the beasts, or awaken them forever. Mason stared at her, realization dawning. That's why they're hunting you. Yes, she said quietly. They fear what I am. They call me the key of ruin. Mason knelt beside her, his voice steady. Then maybe it's time someone turned the key the other way. She looked up at him, eyes filled with exhaustion and something deeper. Trust. You don't understand what you're offering. Helping me could doom your kind, too. He smiled faintly. I've been doomed before. Didn't stick. A soft laugh escaped her, fragile but real. She closed her eyes and whispered an ancient chant. The markings on the walls pulsed brighter, spreading light through the cavern. Mason watched in awe as the pillar cracked open, revealing a sphere of floating crystal, swirling with blue mist. Elira's voice trembled. This is the core seed. It holds the command to reset the balance. But using it will draw every hunter in the system. Then we make it count, Mason said firmly. We end this on our terms. Elira looked at him long, her silver eyes softening. You are strange, human. You see danger and call it purpose, he shrugged. Comes with the job. She placed her hand over his, her touch warm, glowing faintly. Then let us fight together. Not for tribes or laws, but for the right to choose our own fate. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert. The sky dimmed as hunter ships entered the atmosphere, casting long shadows over the cliffs. Mason looked up, his hand tightening on his blaster. Looks like they heard us. Elira turned toward the tunnel entrance, her mark burning bright once again. Then let them come. The desert remembers the power they tried to bury. And deep beneath the cliffs, the ancient chamber began to wake. The ground pulsed with light. The old machines of her people stirred, not as weapons of control, but as guardians waiting for a command. The war that began in the forest was about to end here, in fire, sand, and memory. The first light of morning spilled across the red desert like fire on glass. Dust swirled in the dry air, carrying the hum of engines, dozens of them. From the top of the cliff, Mason could see the hunter fleet descending through the clouds, their ships gleaming silver against the dawn. They were coming fast. Below, the canyon shimmered with energy as Elira stood at the heart of the ancient chamber, her silver skin glowing brighter with every breath. The core seed hovered above her palms, spinning slowly, its light pulsing with her heartbeat. Around her, the carvings on the walls had awakened, glowing veins of blue light stretching into the desert like roots beneath the sand. Mason ran a hand across his forehead, sweat and dust mixing on his skin. He had spent the night preparing crude defenses, mining charges buried under sand, blaster turrets salvaged from the wrecked cruiser, and an old plasma rifle slung across his back. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. Elira looked up at him, her voice soft but steady. When they arrive, they'll try to take me alive. If they can't, they'll burn everything to ash. Mason smirked grimly. Then we'll make sure they choke on the ash. Her eyes met his, and for a moment neither spoke. The rising sun reflected in her silver irises, turning them gold. She looked both divine and human in that light, a creature of power and sorrow. Then, from the horizon, the hunters' ships roared. The ground trembled as they descended, sending waves of sand spiraling into the air. Sleek figures dropped from the sky, armored soldiers with mirrored masks and long energy spears. Behind them, cages of living metal unfolded, releasing tamed beasts, mutated versions of the savage boars Mason had fought in the forest. Their tusks glowed like molten iron, their eyes red with control implants. Mason raised his rifle. Showtime. The first wave charged across the canyon floor. The sand exploded as Mason triggered the mines, brilliant arcs of blue fire tearing through the beasts. The shockwave hit the cliff, sending hot air rushing past his face. He ducked behind cover, fired 3 quick shots, and hit 2 soldiers square in the chest. Elira stood unmoving, whispering words in her native tongue. Her mark burned white-hot as streams of energy flowed from the core seed into the earth. The sand beneath the hunters began to shift, rippling like water. The lead hunter raised his spear, shouting something in her language, an order, a curse. Elira's voice rose, defiant and sharp. You cannot chain life forever. The ground erupted. From the sand burst vines of glowing crystal wrapping around the beasts and dragging them down. Energy pulsed through the canyon, lighting the sky in bright blue. Mason shielded his eyes, grinning in disbelief. Guess that's your version of air support. But the hunters adapted fast. They regrouped, aiming their plasma cannons at Elira. Mason saw it too late. Elira, down! The blasts struck near her, throwing her backward. The core seed dimmed, spinning erratically. Mason sprinted down the slope, sliding through dust and fire to reach her. She coughed, blood glowing faintly blue on her lips. Don't stop, he said urgently, helping her to her feet. You're winning this! Her voice was weak but fierce. No, we're winning this. Behind them, the canyon shook again. The old machines embedded in the rock walls came alive, ancient constructs shaped like beasts of stone and light. They rose, towering above the battlefield, their eyes burning with Elira's energy. The hunters hesitated. That was all Mason needed. He raised his blaster and charged forward, shouting, Now or never! The machines struck, beams of energy sweeping across the canyon, tearing through ships and soldiers alike. Mason fought through the chaos, firing, dodging, dragging Elira away from falling debris. Explosions painted the desert sky orange and blue. A final hunter ship swooped low, its cannon glowing red-hot, aiming straight for them. Mason turned, firing until his weapon overheated. Come on, come on. Then Elira stepped forward, her body blazing like a star. She lifted both hands and the core seed rose between them, spinning faster, brighter, until it exploded in a wave of light that drowned everything. The explosion was silent. The light consumed the ships, the beasts, and the hunters, turning them into dust and glass. Mason felt the ground vanish beneath him, and then nothing. When the light faded, the desert was quiet again. The sky was clear. The ships were gone. The machines stood still once more, now just stone. Mason blinked, his ears ringing. The air smelled like rain, even though there were no clouds. He turned. Elira was on her knees, her glow fading fast. He stumbled toward her. Hey, stay with me. You did it. They're gone. Her voice was faint, trembling. The balance restored. The beasts are free now. The hunters ended. He caught her before she fell, holding her against his chest. Her silver skin was dimming, her heartbeat slowing. Don't you dare fade on me, he whispered. You're not done yet. She smiled weakly, her fingers brushing his cheek. Mason Hale, you are the only human I ever trusted. Remember that. Her light flickered, then went out. Mason sat in the silent canyon, holding her still body, the wind whispering softly through the sand. Around him, the desert shimmered with faint blue veins of light, the last traces of her power sinking back into the earth. The war was over, but the victory felt like a wound he'd never heal. Far above, the first rays of full daylight broke across the horizon, falling on the man who had saved a world, and lost the only being who had made it worth saving. The desert slept in silence after the storm. Where once there had been fire, plasma, and screams, now there was only wind, soft, endless wind carrying the scent of iron and ash. The sun rose slow and heavy, its light catching on fragments of melted glass that now littered the canyon floor like scattered stars. Mason sat among them, the air still buzzing faintly with the aftershock of Elira's final surge. Her body lay motionless in his arms, the faint shimmer of her silver skin fading to pale gray. She looked peaceful, too peaceful, as if she had simply drifted into another world. He hadn't spoken for hours. The desert didn't need words. It demanded silence, as if to honor what had been lost. His uniform was torn, streaked with alien dust and dried blood, his hands shaking. But when he finally looked down at her, something inside him steadied. You don't get to vanish like this, he whispered, his voice breaking. Not after everything we fought for. He gently set her down on the sand and reached for the small crystal sphere, the remains of the core seed, still pulsing faintly beside her. The light within it flickered weakly like the last ember of a dying star. Mason touched it and the glow strengthened for a moment. A soft voice echoed in his head. The seed is not mine alone, he froze. The voice wasn't coming from outside, it was inside him, clear and calm. Elira's voice. Elira, he whispered, glancing around the canyon as if she might appear again. I am part of the system now, the voice said, soft as wind. The balance must survive, even if I cannot. Mason swallowed hard. You mean you're alive in there? Alive enough, she answered. The core carries consciousness, mine and the world's. I chose to stay so you could leave. Mason stared at the horizon, at the endless sand stretching toward the sun. Leave? After all this? I'm not going anywhere without you, he muttered. But then the ground beneath him shifted. The crystal veins that had spread through the canyon began to fade, their light flowing upward into the sky. Slowly, the sand hardened into glass, sealing the wounds of the earth. The desert was healing, Elira's final act. Mason, her voice whispered again, gentler now. Go, the world is safe, my people will not rise again to hunt or enslave. Their power is gone. You gave me the courage to end it, he clenched his fists. You gave me something too. You made me remember what humanity means. There was a long silence, and then, just for a second, a faint laugh, like the one she'd given him in the canyon after they crashed. Then, perhaps, both our kinds have hope. The light faded completely. The core seed cracked, its fragments drifting upward like dust in sunlight before dissolving into the air. Mason stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been. The wind picked up, brushing against his face like a final touch. He closed his eyes, letting the silence settle inside him. Hours later, he returned to the wreck of his cruiser. The hull was scorched and half buried, but he managed to coax the engines back to life. The systems hummed weakly, like an old heartbeat that refused to stop. As he lifted off, the canyon below shimmered one last time, a pulse of light racing across the dunes, forming Elira's mark in the sand before fading forever. From orbit, the planet looked peaceful again. No hunter ships, no storms, just an ocean of gold and red under a calm blue sky. Mason leaned back in the pilot's seat, staring at the endless stars ahead. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small shard of the crystal, cool and faintly glowing. It pulsed once softly as if acknowledging him. He smiled faintly. Guess you're still watching, huh? Outside, the cruiser drifted past the edge of the atmosphere, into the quiet black sea of space. Mason set a new course, no destination, just forward. His world had been full of borders and orders once, but now it was just him, the stars, and the memory of the woman who had changed everything. As the cruiser accelerated, a faint streak of silver light flared behind it, like a comet trailing across the dawn. And somewhere within that endless sky, far beyond human reach, a whisper lingered, soft, eternal, full of warmth and wonder. He saved me from death, and I gave him the sky. The ship vanished into the horizon, leaving behind a planet reborn, and a legend whispered through the winds of Vion 4, of the human who defied hunters, who fought beside an exile, and who carried her light among the stars.